And into Bynum, back out Bryant, shot clock at 7. Bryant leads, falling away, puts it in! And the Lakers take a 1-point lead with 7.3 remaining. What a clutch shot once again from Kobe Bryant.
Hey guys, what's going on? Welcome back to another AP Sports video. This is going to be the first non-recap video in what feels like forever. So should be pretty epic. I've got Archer back with me. The little Zoom podcast setup is going on.
It's been a minute.
So definitely excited for this one. Today we're talking about this year's free agent class. It's not the best class. There's some, I guess, a couple good players, but that's really about it.
There's obviously the big boys, but there's a lot of good role players to talk about. It all just comes down to money and what a team needs. So I want to get started.
Yeah, for sure. Number one position is Kawhi Leonard. Now, the playoffs are still going on right now. He is a Clipper at the moment. He has a player option, so he can either accept or decline that. If he accepts it, he obviously stays with the Clippers. If he declines it, he can explore some other options, but he can always re-sign with the Clippers even if he does decline it. So I would say he's probably going to stay, but another option potentially would be the Knicks. I don't feel super strongly that he's going to go to the Knicks. That's just has enough money.
In general, I don't think that I feel super strongly about a single destination, but Kawhi Leonard will fit anywhere he goes. You know, he's one of the best players in the league. He proved that, in this playoffs, what he did against the Mavs, it looked like they might have been out for the count, and he brought them back from the dead. So as much as I think that he will stay in LA, I think that other options are probably being explored in his head, especially if this Jazz series doesn't go as planned. So like Knicks, no bias, but Bulls are a potential destination. We've got two All-Stars. We're a big market. We need somebody to kind of revive the franchise a little bit. Zach LaVine can't do that on his own. So, I wouldn't be opposed maybe Kawhi Leonard joining the Bulls. But any team's going to accept him. And although he might not be as good as he was in Toronto, he's still pretty damn good.
I think he might be just as good as he was in Toronto.
I think he might be too, but obviously he came to a team, won a championship, and left. It's kind of iconic.
We'll see if that's what he does in LA. He might end up doing that.
Playoffs aren't over. Playoffs are not over. That's the case with a lot of players on this list. It's just the playoffs haven't ended yet, so the full picture isn't clear yet, but we definitely still want to talk about it while we can.
And that's the same with our number 2 guy at Chris Paul. He also is a player option. Now, I could see him. I think he's more likely to decline his player option. I don't think he's declining it to go anywhere else. I just think he's going to take more team-friendly deal, but longer years because he is getting older. So I think he's definitely going to go out, re-sign with the Suns. He's on the books for $44 million this upcoming year, which is a ton. I think he'll probably go down to $32 million, something in that range for a longer period of time.
Yeah, I agree with that as well. But it's Chris Paul, he just left the Thunder after leading them to the playoffs. He left the Rockets, wasn't necessarily his choice, obviously, but he's been bouncing around a little bit. We've obviously seen the impact he has, but I think any team that needs a point guard needs to be monitoring this situation as closely as possible, especially with rumors that have been coming out of him declining his player option. While that probably just means he's going to end up re-signing with more years and maybe a less pay, it's you can't just ignore that as any team. Any team with the point guard need, like the Bulls. The Bulls need a lot of things, and the point guard is number 1 on the list. So
Pelicans would definitely be fine having him back as well. So
that's the thing.
Mike Conley's the third guy we've got on our list here. He's an unrestricted free agent. He's with Utah right now. They're in the playoffs. I think depending on how this series goes, probably stay in Utah. But, inside source here, Grizzlies Nation apparently had a chat with Mike Conley asking him to come back and was acknowledged. Now, the acknowledgement could mean Mike is headed back to Memphis, but we don't know. So
there was acknowledgement.
Shout out to Grizzlies Nation for giving us that.
We've got inside information that nobody else in the internet has.
Yep. So. He acknowledged it. It doesn't necessarily mean he's headed back to Memphis, but it's definitely on the table, whether that's later in the career or this upcoming year. Obviously depends on Utah's playoff success, but Memphis was a team that was in the playoffs. They looked solid. So wouldn't be shocked if Mike came back. He can play a little bit of shooting guard.
A little bit of an oddball location for Mike. Even though he's playing this team in the playoffs next, the Clippers don't necessarily have a point guard. They've got a couple guys that can fill in the role, kind of. But Mike Conley is still playing some of the best basketball of his career. Just had his first All-Star appearance, even if it was a little out of pity, just a little bit out of pity. But, if he signs for a little less money and really wants to get a ring, I think the Clippers are a good destination, as long as Kawhi stays, obviously. But
yeah. Clippers are a really good spot. They do have Rondo there, but I bet you Rondo, I mean, he's way too old to be even considered a starting
although
guard.
Rondo is good and I really like him, and I think they totally won the Lou Williams trade.
Yeah.
I'd rather have Mike Conley.
Oh, for sure, rather have him. Their 3-point percentage was already crazy this year, so adding him would help a lot more. That's a good destination that I did not think of. I don't know cap-wise how that would work, but that is a good spot.
I mean, the thing about that is I think at this point he's probably not going to be taking $30 million a year, so they can fit him into that, just using his good graces of wanting a ring. You know what I mean?
Yeah. If he takes a team-friendly deal, that would be pretty sweet.
I think that if he goes there, that's going to have to be what happens.
Yeah. And so Kyle Lowry's up next at the 4 spot on our list. He's an unrestricted free agent as well. And so he's obviously in Toronto now. He's been with several different teams, but he's played his best basketball for sure in Toronto. This upcoming season, the Raptors aren't really looking to compete quite as much as they have previously. With Nick Nurse as their coach, they could still be a playoff team. I would not be surprised. But I could see him going to either the Bulls or Knicks, just because both of those teams really lack a playmaker. It was super evident for the Knicks in the playoffs. Julius Randle is a great player by all means, but Derrick Rose was heavily relied on as the main playmaker for that team in the playoffs. So I think the Knicks could take a swing at him. And the Bulls don't really even have a point guard. So
I mean, we've got my main man, Kobe White, but that's a work in progress.
Yeah.
And if things don't pan out, I mean, Kyle Lowry is one of the best point guards of his generation. I mean, he's played incredible. He's probably the best Toronto Raptor of all time, like just in terms of longevity and what he did. So I really like him going to the Bulls as a Bulls fan. But I also think that this is where I thought he was going to go personally at the trade deadline. I thought that the Sixers could come in and grab him just because, they've been working so hard at getting this Simmons, Embiid, Harris thing to work out. And although the cap space is a little iffy for them, if they can make it work and somehow grab Lowry, that's big because they're also a team that doesn't have a solid, solidified starting point guard. You know what I mean? Like he could fill that gap.
Yeah, my issue with Philly is they don't really have the money, and I think Ben Simmons already plays enough of a point guard role.
That's true.
For them to have to go out of their way and get another point guard.
Yeah, I just think that Kyle Lowry's overall basketball IQ, everything about him,
he would help a lot.
He adds to any team,
Yeah.
and it's just the Sixers have been trying so hard to get to that spot,
Yeah.
And as they are, they're the 1 seed in the East. They played it incredible this season. But if they lose in the second round of the playoffs again, things could go haywire and they might need to have one last hurrah at it before they rebuild. You know what they can't continue to throw the same stone at the same wall. They got to figure something out.
Yeah. That's good in theory. I just don't think money-wise that's going to pan out, especially for a guy like Lowry. He obviously wants to win a ring, but he already has one. Maybe Conley, if he's willing to take less money, but I do think the Clippers are a better destination for Conley as well. Although Conley has been more of a, I guess, low-key guy. I don't know if the bright lights of LA or where he necessarily wants to go. But number 5, we have DeMar DeRozan. He's an unrestricted free agent as well. That's kind of a common theme here. Most guys we're going to be talking about are unrestricted. Been with the Spurs for a while. It feels like every offseason they're trying to trade him because of his contract. That contract is finally expired. This season, he became a great playmaker, was already a very, very prolific scorer. Doesn't have a great 3-ball, but with the adding of his passing, I think he's an incredibly good player that a lot of these teams could benefit from. You're going to kind of see a theme here. The Hawks, Bulls, and Knicks all have a ton of cap space, and honestly, they all kind of need another sort of star. The Bulls and Knicks in particular need the playmaking. The Hawks honestly, just the rich will get richer. They were the 5 seed this year in the second round of the playoffs. They have the money to add another star next to Trae Young, and it doesn't look like they're going to be retaining John Collins. So he could be the way to go.
Personally, I think that he could definitely go to the Hawks. And I think that if I'm DeMar, that's where I want to go. The Hawks have a really bright future. Trae Young is obviously showcasing what he can do. All DeMar's going to do is help them. The 3-point is an issue, especially when you get to the playoffs. Just, he is not a 3-point shooter, never has been, probably never will be. So working with that, and if John Collins leaves, I think he's a really good fit for the Hawks.
Yeah, and I would agree with that. And if you look at this Hawks team, I don't even know if him necessarily not being able to shoot the 3 ball is a massive deal, because it feels like everybody on the Hawks can shoot outside of Capella. They've been a very good shooting team this playoffs. Now, 7th, we have Cameron Payne. This is another guy that has been incredible.
Very small sample size.
Incredible in the playoffs. He's looked like a starting caliber point guard. And, when players have short stints of good play in the playoffs, one team comes to mind for free agent signings, and that is the Detroit Pistons. They did this with Jeremy Grant this year. They did it with Mason Plumlee this year. They looked for guys that had good short stints in the playoffs. And if this trend continues, I'm so sorry for Cameron Payne.
Yeah, I was about to say, you kind of talked about it before we started recording, but you kind of just throw him on a player that played really well for a little bit, but we didn't get to see enough of him in the regular season. Just throw him on the Pistons. I mean, they need every position. They need an upgrade at every position besides Jeremy Grant. And even then, he's not the top cream of the crop. So they'll be going after everybody they can, but it is the Detroit Pistons. So, and it speaks volumes.
Yeah, this is by no means a slight at Cameron Payne. What he's done is incredible for himself. He's making a lot of money this upcoming year for sure. I personally hope he stays with the Suns, but if there's any team other than the Suns that's going to take a run at him, it's going to be the Pistons. You just have a feeling.
I think he'll probably a lot of it kind of depends on what happens with Chris Paul, because
for sure.
He's not going to be their starting. I don't think he should be their starting point guard, but if they keep Chris Paul, he's the perfect backup to Chris
Paul.
Perfect. Sure. He's been great. And that's the role that we've seen him succeed in.
This 8th guy is a guy that's gotten a lot of hype, mostly for his shooting, obviously, and that is Duncan Robinson. Now,
and his podcasting skills.
Yep. So thank you for that, Duncan. Last year, if you look at the free agent market, I think this was 2 years ago, but you've got Bertans that got 5 years, $80 million. Do we think that Duncan Robinson is worth more than that? I would say probably a little bit more.
Yeah, I would say he's better than Bertans, but there's also Joe Harris. So
yeah, he is restricted. So that means that the Heat are going to have the first shot at him. Now the Heat can kind of axe Iguodala because he has a team option, and so they'll probably get rid of his contract. I think the Heat will try and keep him, but if they don't keep him, watch out for the Knicks. The Knicks did not have a volume 3-point shooter this season, especially ones that were able to hit in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens with Duncan. I'd say Knicks and Heat.
Yeah, I honestly didn't even think about anywhere else for Duncan. He's a shooter. He'll fit anywhere he goes, but I think he's just going to stay on the Heat. It's clear to me that he loves the Heat. He likes staying in Miami. Seems like a guy that's pretty loyal. And they took a chance on him as an undrafted guy, gave him minutes. He's played fantastic. He's going to get his bag. And I think that bag's going to be with the Heat just because of the past that they have. He's already connected. I can't even see him on another team personally. He's on the Heat. Duncan Robinson, I don't see him leaving.
All right. Next up, we have Lonzo Ball. Now, this is a guy that I have had my qualms with for sure this past season as a Pelicans fan. I don't know how I feel about him.
That might be an understatement. Qualms.
Yeah, he's easily one of the most inconsistent players in the NBA. I would say he's either staying with the Pels, which I hope he does not, frankly, or he's
just don't like the Lonzo Ball fans. That's
I don't like the fans, and honestly, the Pels have made it relatively clear that they're trying to get better at the guard position. They've drafted Kyra Lewis last year and Nikhil the year prior. Both those guys have the ability to play point guard. But I would expect the Heat, Knicks, and Bulls to all take runs at him on a sign-in trade. So whatever that entails for the Pelicans, I'm not sure. But a sign and trade with Lonzo Ball could be in the future, and I would think Heat, Knicks, Bulls.
That's probably the route that will be taken. As a Bulls fan, I like Lonzo. I think he'd fit, but the biggest problem, like you said, he's incredibly inconsistent. And, he's just a spotty shooter overall. He picked it up this season, but I'm a little worried just if that carries over to the next season with his change in his shot form. But with that said, I don't think I'd love it if he went to the Bulls, mainly because the inconsistency. We already have a point guard who's inconsistent who we're developing. Do we want to trade for another point guard who's inconsistent and still needs to develop? Probably not. But is he better than Kobe White at the moment? Yeah, he is. So
yeah,
I don't know. We'll see. I can definitely see Arturas Karnisovas, the president of operations at the Bulls, getting Lonzo just because of the overarching hype that's been around him.
Next up, we have Lauri Markkanen, another Bulls guy.
Bulls mentioned everywhere.
I mean, we're both relatively convinced he's not going to stay in Chicago. He's a restricted free agent, so likely another sign and trade scenario. I would imagine he ends up with the Spurs, just because the Spurs, honestly, I feel like they're decent at the guard position. They've got a lot of young guards. They don't have a ton of young forwards or centers. I guess they have like Eubanks and Pirtle. They're both actually relatively young, but it's power forward position. They had Aldridge. He's gone now. Vassell plays small forward. So I think Lowry would fit in relatively well. They have a ton of money. So they'll either go after Lowry or John Collins, I think.
If I'm the Spurs, I'm picking John Collins in that situation. I like Lowry. I was a big believer in him before the season. But with what I saw this season, he got injured again. He was really spotty. His defense honestly regressed. If I'm any team, I would be wary of Lauri Markkanen just because he had that big rookie season and then kind of hasn't done much since. I tried to give him this year as a buffer year, and I did really think that he could be even in the most improved player of the year award. I actually thought he would win it to start the season. But with that said, I think it'll probably end up being the Spurs just because of their money, and they need a player that can get you buckets once DeMar leaves, and they're going to rely on Keldon Johnson, DeJounte Murray a lot to score. They're going to need some more offensive power. Another team that I think is the Dallas Mavericks, who, there's been rumors about Lowry wanting to go there, and if they do end up getting rid of Kristaps, they can throw Lowry in at the power forward, and, they don't have to give up too much for him.
Yeah, that's fair. I would say that's definitely going to require Porzingis leaving, which is on the table at this point. So next up's John Collins, a guy that I already kind of mentioned. I think the Spurs have a really decent shot at signing him with all the cap space they have. He's also a restricted free agent. So once again, the Hawks would need something in return. I would say the Spurs have a great shot. After this playoff run, the Hawks honestly might want to keep John Collins. I know there's been some issues between the two on this contract extension for the last several years. And then the Knicks are another team with a ton of money that could potentially take a run at him, although they have been rumored to get Kelly Oubre Jr. And then you've got a team like the Heat that has a decent bit of cap space and honestly just needs a change from this year because whatever they did in the playoffs did not work.
Yeah, I think he could stay with the Hawks. There's a lot of options for John Collins. But I think the Knicks are going to take a big swing at him just because, they saw firsthand. He did have a very bad game, but he also had multiple very good games. He started off this series against the Sixers really well as he's just been playing great basketball. And although he isn't the best defensive player, I think he can fit in with the Knicks if Julius can move to the small forward position and they allow just that offensive connection to form. I think it can form. And I think that Julius Randle's a pretty good playmaker, especially if they keep Rose and they can involve John Collins more in the offense. It's going to depend on his injury situation and obviously his contract situation, but I think that's not a far-fetched sign and trade. It will be a sign and trade just because they're restricted.
And one thing honestly that I think John Collins done a great job of this year, I think his bad defense is a little overlooked or I guess overblown, maybe not overlooked. He's not been a great defender historically, but this last season, I actually didn't think he was awful. He's definitely not a center. But if you put him at power forward, I thought he played fine perimeter defense on Julius Randle when he was on him. Most of the time it was he, Bogdanovich, or DeAndre Hunter on Randle, and they all did a very good job. So I think Collins actually has a decent bit of defensive potential, especially on the outside, just not as a rim protector.
Yeah, I do like John Collins. I think his defense is pretty bad. I think a lot of that series against the Knicks had to do with Randle not posting up and just taking jumpers that weren't falling. I don't know if that was necessarily John Collins' defense, but it's not something you can just ignore completely. So you're right. You do have to think about that. But in my opinion, I think that was more Julius Randle than it was John Collins.
All right. Well, awesome. Thanks so much for watching, guys. Thanks for supporting the recaps. If you've been watching those, we're probably going to make more of those, but we're also going to start to transition into making some more of these sit down videos. So if you've got ideas, leave them in the comments, but thanks so much for watching, and peace.